The conference room at Sterling and Associates buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy as I took my seat near the back, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline. Stephanie Windsor, the VP's daughter, and our newly appointed account manager stood at the front presenting quarterly metrics when her gaze landed on my hands. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at me as she interrupted her own presentation. Seriously, Maggie, that pathetic excuse for jewelry belongs in a thrift store, not a professional meeting. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, landing on the simple gold band around my finger. Heat flooded my cheeks as Stephanie's voice dripped with disdain, but I stayed silent, remembering my father's words about dignity under pressure. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I stared down at the ring that had belonged to my father, Thomas Ashworth. It was nothing flashy, just a plain gold signet with a barely visible family crest, worn smooth by decades of wear. To anyone else, it probably did look like something from a secondhand shop, but to me, it represented everything my father had taught me about integrity, hard work, and staying true to your values regardless of what others thought. I'm sorry, everyone, Stephanie continued with mock concern, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they pretend to care about the less fortunate. I know we all want to maintain certain standards here at Sterling and Associates. Some people just don't understand what professional presentation means. She shot me a look that could have frozen Lake Michigan in July before turning back to her PowerPoint slides. My colleague Jennifer Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair beside me, shooting me a sympathetic glance. Around the table, senior executives pretended to study their notes, while the tension thickened like fog rolling off the coast. VP Richard Windsor, Stephanie's father, cleared his throat and nodded approvingly at his daughter's comment, as if publicly humiliating employees was part of good management practice. I twisted the ring around my finger, a habit I developed whenever I felt overwhelmed or attacked. The weight of it reminded me why I was here sitting in this sterile conference room, making $35,000 a year, when I could have been living an entirely different life. 3 years ago, I had made a choice that led me to this moment, and every morning I woke up questioning whether hiding who I really was had been the right decision. The meeting continued around me, as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the awkward energy radiating from my coworkers. Stephanie finished her presentation with the confident smile of someone who had never faced a real challenge in her 26 years of existence. Her designer blazer probably cost more than I made in a month, and her diamond bracelet caught the fluorescent lights every time she gestured toward her charts. As people began filing out of the conference room, I remained seated, staring at the ring that had caused such a scene. My father had worn it every single day of his adult life, through business deals worth millions of dollars and casual dinners at home. He never once acted like it made him better than anyone else, never used it as a weapon to cut others down. The irony wasn't lost on me that Stephanie Windsor thought she was mocking poverty when she was actually insulting one of the most respected names in American industry. But she had no way of knowing that, and I intended to keep it that way. At least that's what I thought, until an unexpected visitor would change everything in just a few hours. 3 hours later, I sat alone in my cramped cubicle on the 15th floor, mechanically sorting through client files, while Stephanie's words echoed in my mind. The fluorescent light above my desk flickered intermittently, casting shadows across the stack of account reports I was supposed to review by 5 o'clock. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows downtown Chicago, stretched out below me a maze of steel and glass that housed millions of people, each carrying their own secrets and struggles. I pulled open my desk drawer and retrieved the small leather journal where I kept personal notes, flipping to a page I had written exactly 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. The date was burned into my memory because it marked the last time I had used my real last name in any professional capacity. Before that catastrophic day, I had been Margaret Elizabeth Ashworth, heir to a manufacturing empire built over 4 generations, with a trust fund worth more than most people could earn in multiple lifetimes. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After discovering that my uncle Harrison Ashworth had systematically embezzled nearly $8 million from various family accounts. Including my inheritance, I had made the radical decision to disappear from high society entirely. The betrayal had cut deeper than any financial loss because Uncle Harrison had been like a second father to me after my real father died of a heart attack when I was 22. He had held my hand at the funeral, promised to guide me through the business world, and assured me that family loyalty was the foundation of everything we built. Instead, he had been slowly draining accounts for over 2 years, funding a gambling addiction and a secret second family in Nevada that none of us knew existed. When the FBI investigation concluded and Harrison received his 10-year prison sentence, I realized that money and family name meant nothing if the people closest to you could betray you so completely. That's when I legally changed my name to Margaret Sullivan, using my mother's maiden name, and moved from our family estate in Lake Forest to a modest apartment in Lincoln Park. The decision to work at Sterling and Associates under my new identity had been carefully calculated. I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed based on merit rather than connections, that the values my father had taught me about hard work and integrity weren't just empty words spoken by someone who had never faced real challenges. For 3 years, I had lived on my salary alone, never touching any of the remaining family money that lawyers and accountants assured me was safely protected. Maggie, you okay? Jennifer's voice snapped me back to the present. She stood beside my cubicle holding 2 cups of coffee from the break room, her expression filled with the kind of genuine concern that had made us friends despite our different backgrounds. Jennifer worked 2 jobs to support her sick mother and younger brother, commuting an hour each way from a neighborhood where gunshots weren't unusual background noise. I'm fine, I lied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Just thinking about the Morrison account presentation next week. Jennifer settled into the visitor chair beside my desk, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. Look, I need to tell you something about what happened in that meeting. Stephanie's been doing this to people for months, ever since her daddy got her that promotion she didn't earn. Last month, she made Angela cry in front of the entire creative team by commenting on her shoes. The month before that, she accidentally scheduled Derek to work every weekend until he quit. This information didn't surprise me, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach clench with anger. Why doesn't anyone report her to HR? Are you serious? Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. Her father is the VP. HR works for him. Besides, she's smart about it. Never anything you could prove in a formal complaint, just constant little cuts designed to make people miserable until they leave on their own. I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink in an empty email as I processed this information. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. Here was someone using family privilege to systematically destroy other people's careers and self-respect, while I had walked away from similar privilege because I wanted to earn my place honestly. The contrast felt like a cosmic joke. The thing is, Jennifer continued, I think she specifically targets people she perceives as beneath her social class. You drive that 10-year-old Honda, you live in that tiny apartment, you shop at Target instead of Nordstrom. To someone like Stephanie, those are signs of weakness she can exploit. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. If Stephanie Windsor knew that the woman she was targeting for her poor lifestyle had grown up in a mansion with 12 bedrooms, a private tennis court, and a garage full of luxury cars she had never bothered to drive, it would have shattered her small-minded worldview. But that knowledge would also destroy everything I had worked to build over the past 3 years. I've been thinking about looking for another job, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. Maybe somewhere with a healthier work environment. Don't let her win, Jennifer said fiercely. You're the best junior account coordinator we have. Your client satisfaction scores are through the roof. You never miss deadlines, and you actually understand what the numbers mean instead of just pushing them around spreadsheets. If you leave because of her, she'll just move on to the next person. Her words hit harder than she probably intended. Running away was exactly what I had done 3 years ago, when Uncle Harrison's betrayal made everything feel impossible. I had told myself it was about independence and self-reliance, but maybe it was also about fear. fear of trusting the wrong people again, fear of being vulnerable to those who claim to care about me, fear of staying in a world where money and name recognition mattered more than character. But working at Sterling and Associates had taught me something valuable about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Jennifer fought every day to keep her family afloat without complaining or asking for special treatment. Derek had worked those weekends without protest until he literally couldn't anymore. Angela had dried her tears and continued doing excellent work despite Stephanie's cruelty. They had courage I was still learning to develop. "You're right," I said, meeting Jennifer's eyes with newfound determination. "She doesn't get to win." As Jennifer headed back to her own desk, I turned my attention to the Morrison account files with renewed focus. Whatever happened next, I would face it as the person I had chosen to become, not the person I was born to be. The ring on my finger caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and I thought about my father's voice saying that true strength came from lifting others up, not tearing them down. I had no idea that in just 2 hours, a completely unexpected encounter would test every principle I had learned about hiding versus standing up for what was right. 2 weeks passed like a slow-motion nightmare as Stephanie Windsor's harassment campaign intensified with surgical precision. She had apparently decided that public humiliation in meetings wasn't sufficient punishment for my audacity to exist in her workspace while wearing unfashionable jewelry. Instead, she launched a systematic assault designed to destroy my professional reputation, one calculated move at a time. It started on a Tuesday morning when she assigned me the Henderson Automotive account presentation with exactly 48 hours notice. Henderson was our second largest client, representing nearly $2 million in annual billing, and their quarterly review required extensive market analysis, competitive research, and strategic recommendations that typically took a full team 2 weeks to prepare. "I know it's short notice," Stephanie had said with false sweetness during our emergency meeting, "but the client specifically requested someone with fresh perspectives. I thought this might be a good growth opportunity for you." Her smile could have powered half of downtown Chicago with its artificial brightness. I knew immediately that she expected me to fail spectacularly, probably hoping I would panic and ask for help that she could then refuse to provide. Instead, I smiled back and accepted the challenge, even though it meant I would be working 18-hour days with virtually no sleep. Pride and stubbornness had always been my greatest weaknesses, but they were also the qualities that had carried me through every major crisis in my life. The next 48 hours blurred together in a haze of coffee research documents and presentation slides. I contacted every industry source I could find, analyzed 5 years of market data, and created what I honestly believed was some of the best strategic work of my career. By Thursday morning, I had a comprehensive presentation that demonstrated not only Henderson's current market position, but also 3 specific opportunities for growth that could increase their market share by 15% over the next 2 years. The client lunch was held at the Signature Room on the 95th floor of the John Hancock Center, a restaurant that screamed exclusivity with its panoramic city views and $300 wine list. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing my best professional outfit, which I suddenly realized looked embarrassingly shabby compared to the setting. My black suit from Target stood out like a neon sign among the designer clothing worn by everyone else in the room. Stephanie arrived with VP Richard and 3 Henderson executives, including CEO Patricia Henderson herself. As we were seated at a table overlooking Lake Michigan, Stephanie took control of the conversation with practiced ease, discussing weekend trips to Aspen and mutual acquaintances from various country clubs. I sat quietly reviewing my presentation notes and waiting for my opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. "I should apologize in advance," Stephanie said as the appetizers arrived, directing her comment toward Patricia Henderson while gesturing vaguely in my direction. "We had some staffing challenges this quarter, so I had to assign this presentation to someone with more limited experience in luxury market dynamics. I'm sure she'll do her best, but she doesn't really have the background to understand your customer demographic." The condescension in her voice made my cheeks burn, but Patricia Henderson just nodded politely and turned her attention to me. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective, she said kindly. Sometimes fresh eyes can see opportunities that industry veterans miss. When the time came for my presentation, I stood and delivered what I knew was exceptional work. I had identified 3 untapped market segments that aligned perfectly with Henderson's brand positioning, backed up with solid research and realistic implementation timelines. The executives asked detailed questions that demonstrated genuine interest, and Patricia Henderson even complimented my analysis of their competitors' recent marketing campaigns. But as soon as I finished, Stephanie seamlessly took control again. Those are exactly the insights I was hoping we would uncover, she said, somehow managing to claim credit for my work without explicitly lying. My team has been developing these strategic directions for several weeks now, and we believe they represent significant opportunities for partnership expansion. I stared at her in complete disbelief as she continued speaking, rephrasing my recommendations as if they had originated from her own brilliant strategic mind. Richard Windsor nodded approvingly at his daughter's leadership, while the Henderson executives took notes on concepts I had spent 2 sleepless nights developing. The lunch concluded with enthusiastic handshakes and commitments to move forward with implementation, but I felt like I was watching everything through a fog of exhaustion and betrayal. As we walked toward the elevator, Stephanie finally acknowledged my presence again. "Thank you for putting together those background slides," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "The research compilation was very thorough." Research compilation. As if 48 hours of strategic analysis could be reduced to basic data entry tasks that any intern could handle. I wanted to scream to demand credit for my work to expose her manipulation in front of everyone who had witnessed it. Instead, I smiled and thanked her for the opportunity to contribute to such an important client relationship. The pattern continued relentlessly over the following week. Every assignment came with impossible deadlines or unrealistic expectations. Every success was immediately credited to Stephanie's supervision or strategic guidance. Every small mistake was magnified and discussed in front of colleagues as evidence of my professional limitations. During Friday afternoon's team meeting, she announced that I would be handling all weekend client communications for the Morrison account, which meant sacrificing my first free weekend in a month to monitor emails and phone calls that never came. When I arrived Monday morning, exhausted and frustrated, she casually mentioned that Morrison had been completely satisfied with their existing communication schedule and hadn't needed any weekend support. "I guess I misunderstood their requirements," she said with theatrical confusion. "But better safe than sorry, right?" And Jennifer tried to offer support whenever possible, bringing me lunch when I was too busy to leave my desk and staying late to help with research when she could manage it. But she was fighting her own battles with increased workload and family responsibilities, and I refused to let Stephanie's campaign against me become everyone else's problem. The breaking point came during the following Tuesday's client call with Morrison. Stephanie had insisted on joining the routine status update supposedly to provide senior oversight for the conversation. 5 minutes into the call, she interrupted my presentation to suggest that I might be overwhelming the client with too much technical detail. Sometimes, our junior coordinators get excited about data points that aren't really relevant to strategic decision-making, she explained to Morrison's marketing director. I'll work with her after this call to help focus her communication style. The Morrison executive paused, clearly confused, since my technical detail was exactly what they had requested in previous meetings. "Actually, we appreciate the thoroughness," he said carefully. "The level of analysis has been exactly what we need." But Stephanie pressed on, determined to undermine my credibility, even when the client was actively disagreeing with her assessment. By the end of the call, I felt like a child being supervised by a disappointed parent, rather than a professional handling her own accounts. That evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights beyond my windows, I finally admitted to myself what I had been avoiding for 3 weeks. This wasn't just workplace competition or personality conflicts. Stephanie Windsor was systematically trying to destroy my career because she viewed me as beneath her social status, and my refusal to fight back was enabling every cruel move she made. The ring on my finger caught the reflection from my laptop screen as I typed resignation letters I couldn't bring myself to send. Tomorrow would bring another day of calculated humiliation, another opportunity for Stephanie to demonstrate her power over someone she considered inferior. But tomorrow would also bring something neither of us expected: a visitor whose presence would change everything we thought we knew about power, respect, and the true meaning of success. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Chicago feel like the greatest city in America, though I was too exhausted to appreciate it. 3 weeks of Stephanie's calculated torture had left me running on caffeine and stubborn determination, but I dragged myself to the office, determined to maintain professional standards, regardless of what fresh humiliation awaited me. The big conference room on the 20th floor had been transformed overnight for what Richard Windsor was calling the most important business meeting in Sterling and Associates' 15-year history. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The good china had been retrieved from storage, and catering staff bustled around arranging fruit platters and gourmet coffee service that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Harrison Technologies was considering a merger that would inject $50 million into our company while expanding their marketing capabilities nationwide. Robert Harrison, the tech billionaire who had built his empire from a Chicago garage 30 years ago, was scheduled to arrive at 10 o'clock for preliminary discussions that could transform everyone's careers overnight. Stephanie had appointed herself as meeting coordinator naturally and spent the morning directing staff preparations with the authority of someone planning a royal coronation. She wore a navy Armani suit that had probably cost more than my car, and her diamond tennis bracelet caught the morning sunlight streaming through the conference room windows. "Maggie, I need you to handle refreshment service during the meeting," she announced as I passed through the hallway carrying client files. "Just coffee, water, basic hospitality duties. Try not to draw attention to yourself." The message was crystal clear. I was being relegated to servant status for the most important business meeting in company history. While senior executives would be showcasing their strategic expertise and building relationships with a billionaire, I would be invisible, pouring coffee and collecting empty plates like hired help. But I needed this job at least until I could figure out my next move. So I nodded and accepted the assignment with as much dignity as I could manage. At least serving refreshments would give me a front row seat to observe how major business deals were actually conducted at the highest levels. Robert Harrison arrived 20 minutes early, stepping out of a black Mercedes sedan that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 55, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with calculating intelligence. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, as Richard Windsor introduced him to the assembled team, and he made genuine eye contact with every person in the room, including the administrative assistants and junior staff. "Thank you all for accommodating the schedule change," he said as we gathered around the conference table. "I know merger discussions can be disruptive, but I believe in seeing how companies actually function in their normal environment rather than staged presentations." I positioned myself near the refreshment station, ready to serve coffee or water as needed while staying professionally invisible. Stephanie launched into her prepared remarks about market positioning and growth opportunities, consulting notes she had obviously rehearsed extensively. Richard beamed with paternal pride as his daughter commanded the room's attention with polished confidence. 15 minutes into the presentation, Harrison raised his hand politely. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I get some coffee? Black, no sugar." This was my cue. I approached his chair with the sterling silver coffee service, focusing on pouring smoothly without spilling or making noise that might disturb the ongoing discussion. As I leaned forward to fill his cup, Harrison's eyes landed on my left hand, holding the coffee pot. He went completely white. The transformation was so dramatic that Richard Windsor stopped mid-sentence and looked around in confusion. Harrison was staring at my ring with an expression I couldn't interpret, his mouth slightly open, as if he was seeing something impossible. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a strange intensity that made everyone in the room turn to stare at me. Heat flooded my cheeks as 12 pairs of eyes focused on the simple gold band that had caused so much trouble 3 weeks ago. Stephanie looked mortified that her hired coffee server was suddenly the center of attention during the most important meeting of her career. It was my father's. I answered honestly, unsure why a basic family heirloom would provoke such a reaction from a tech billionaire. Your father's name, Harrison said, leaning forward slightly. What was your father's name? The room was completely silent now, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting for my response. I could feel Stephanie's furious embarrassment radiating across the table, but Harrison's eyes never left mine as he waited for an answer. Thomas Ashworth, I said simply. Robert Harrison stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward into the wall. His face had gone from white to flushed red, and he was staring at me with an expression that seemed to combine shock recognition and something that looked almost like grief. Then they have no idea who you are, he said, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. Richard Windsor cleared his throat nervously. I'm sorry, Bob, but I'm not sure I understand the connection. Harrison didn't answer immediately. He was studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle, taking in details that apparently meant something significant to him. The resemblance to my father had always been strong. The same dark brown eyes, the same stubborn jawline, the same way of holding myself when faced with uncomfortable situations. Thomas Ashworth, he repeated slowly as if testing how the name sounded in this context. Thomas built the largest private manufacturing empire in the Midwest. Ashworth Industries supplied components for every major automotive manufacturer in America for over 20 years. Harrison paused, struggling with emotion. He was my closest friend and business partner for 15 years. The silence in the room was deafening. Stephanie's face had gone through several color changes as the implications of Harrison's words sank in. Richard Windsor looked like someone had just told him that his favorite restaurant was actually a front for organized crime. I don't understand, Stephanie said weakly. She's just a junior coordinator. She drives a 10-year-old Honda. She lives in some tiny apartment. Harrison turned toward her with an expression that could have frozen Lake Superior. She is the daughter of the most honorable man I ever knew in business, and apparently the only person in this room with enough character to earn her position through merit, rather than family connections. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Everyone understood exactly what Harrison was saying about Stephanie's qualifications, and the implications for this merger discussion were becoming clearer by the second. I think we need to continue this conversation privately, Harrison said, looking directly at me. Would you be available for lunch today? There are some things about your father that I think you should know. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. The coffee pot was still in my hands, forgotten in the midst of this surreal encounter that was reshaping everything I thought I knew about my carefully constructed new life. As Harrison gathered his materials and prepared to leave, he turned back to address the room one final time. We'll resume merger discussions tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I'll want to conduct some additional research about company culture and employee satisfaction before moving forward. His eyes lingered on Stephanie and Richard as he spoke, and it was clear that this research would not be limited to financial statements and market analysis. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so dramatically that I felt dizzy trying to process what had just happened. After Harrison left the conference room, erupted in whispered conversations and confused speculation, but I barely heard any of it. All I could think about was the look of recognition in Robert Harrison's eyes when he saw my father's ring and his promise that there were things about Thomas Ashworth that I still needed to learn. Robert Harrison's black Mercedes sedan felt like stepping into a different universe as we pulled away from Sterling and Associates at 12:30 that afternoon. The leather seats were softer than any furniture in my apartment, and the complete silence inside the vehicle created an intimate bubble that seemed separate from the busy Chicago streets beyond the tinted windows. I need to apologize for ambushing you like that, Harrison said, as his driver navigated through downtown traffic toward a restaurant I had never heard of, but suspected was well beyond my usual budget range. Seeing that ring brought back memories I wasn't prepared to handle in a business meeting. I twisted the ring around my finger, a nervous habit that had intensified since this morning's revelation. I still don't understand why it affected you so strongly. My father never mentioned knowing anyone from Harrison Technologies. Harrison's laugh carried a note of sadness that made me look at him more carefully. He wouldn't have. Tom was always modest about his business relationships, but we were partners in more ways than just the official paperwork. When I started Harrison Technologies in 1993, your father provided the initial manufacturing infrastructure that made everything possible. This information completely contradicted everything I thought I knew about my father's business history. Thomas Ashworth had built his reputation in traditional manufacturing, supplying automotive companies with precision components that kept assembly lines running smoothly. I had never heard him mention anything related to technology or computer systems. I don't think you're talking about the same person, I said carefully. My father died 5 years ago, and his business was entirely focused on automotive manufacturing. Thomas Michael Ashworth, born December 15th, 1952 in Detroit, Michigan, Harrison recited without hesitation. Graduated from Northwestern University with degrees in mechanical engineering and business administration. Married Catherine Elizabeth Sullivan in 1978. One daughter, Margaret Elizabeth, born October 3rd, 1986. My birth date hung in the air between us like a challenge. There was no way Robert Harrison could know these details unless he had indeed been closely connected to my family for decades. The Mercedes turned onto Michigan Avenue as I struggled to reconcile this information with my understanding of my father's life. The technology partnership was separate from Ashworth Industries, Harrison explained, as if reading my confusion. Tom believed in diversifying his investments, but he also believed in supporting innovation that could benefit American manufacturing. When I needed someone to manufacture the first Harrison computer components, he provided both the facility space and the financial backing to make it happen. We arrived at a restaurant called Alinea, which I recognized as one of the most exclusive establishments in Chicago, despite having never been within 10 blocks of it. The hostess greeted Harrison by name and escorted us to a private dining room that felt more like a luxury hotel suite than a place to eat lunch. The ring, Harrison continued once we were seated, was more than just a family heirloom. Tom had it designed specifically to commemorate our partnership. There were only 3 made, one for him, one for me, and one that he said would go to his daughter when she was old enough to understand what it represented. My hand moved involuntarily to cover the ring as Harrison's words sank in. The simple gold band that had caused so much humiliation 3 weeks ago was actually a symbol of a business partnership worth millions of dollars, created specifically with the intention that I would someday wear it. I've been wearing it for 3 years, I admitted quietly. Ever since I legally changed my name and started working ordinary jobs under my mother's maiden name. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. You changed your name. Margaret Ashworth became Margaret Sullivan. The story of Uncle Harrison's embezzlement and my decision to disappear from high society poured out of me in a rush of words that I hadn't shared with anyone since Jennifer, and even she didn't know the full financial scope of the betrayal. Robert Harrison listened without interrupting his expression, growing more serious as I described the FBI investigation, the prison sentence, and my determination to prove myself independently. $8 million, he repeated when I finished. Your uncle stole $8 million from family accounts. The lawyers recovered about half of it, but by then I'd already decided that I didn't want anything to do with family money or business connections. I wanted to know that anything I achieved was based on my own efforts, not my last name. Harrison was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline while processing everything I had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made me pay attention to every word. There are some things about your financial situation that you need to know, he said slowly. When Tom died, he left very specific instructions about how to handle your inheritance if anything ever happened to the family business or if you ever chose to step away from the Ashworth name. My stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. What kind of instructions, He was worried about exactly the kind of betrayal you experienced with your uncle. Tom had seen too many wealthy families destroyed by relatives who viewed family money as their personal opportunity rather than a responsibility to be protected. So he set up a separate trust fund that would only become accessible when you demonstrated the character and independence he hoped you would develop. Harrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a legal document that looked official and intimidating. This fund has been growing untouched for 5 years, managed by independent trustees who were instructed to monitor your progress without interfering in your choices. The current value is approximately $20 million. $20 million. The number was so large that it didn't seem real, like hearing about the national debt or the distance to the moon. I stared at the document in Harrison's hands, unable to process what this revelation meant for everything I had been trying to accomplish. He was testing me, I said, finally understanding the full scope of my father's planning. The whole time I thought I was proving my independence, he was watching to see if I would actually follow through. Not testing, Harrison corrected gently. Trusting. Tom believed that real character couldn't be inherited or purchased, only developed through facing genuine challenges. He wanted to give you the opportunity to discover who you really were when everything else was stripped away. The irony was staggering. For 3 years, I had been working 40-hour weeks at a job that barely covered my living expenses, convinced that I was choosing integrity over comfort, when my father had already arranged for me to have more financial security than I could have imagined. But he had also ensured that I would only access it after proving to myself and others that money wasn't what defined my worth as a person. The fund comes with one condition, Harrison continued. You have to accept not just the money, but also the responsibility that goes with it. Tom wanted his daughter to use her resources to make a positive impact on other people's lives, not just to live comfortably. I thought about Jennifer working 2 jobs to support her family, about Derek being forced to quit because of Stephanie's harassment, about all the ordinary people I had met over the past 3 years, who were fighting battles much harder than anything I had faced. The money could change everything for them, but it would also change everything for me. There's something else, Harrison said, watching my reaction carefully. I'd like to offer you a position at Harrison Technologies as Vice President of Strategic Development. The salary alone would be more than you could earn anywhere else, but more importantly, it would give you the platform to actually implement the kind of positive changes your father believed in. The convergence of opportunities was overwhelming. Financial security, professional advancement, and the chance to honor my father's memory by using resources responsibly rather than just accumulating them selfishly. But accepting Harrison's offer would also mean acknowledging that my 3-year experiment in ordinary life was officially over. What about the merger with Sterling and Associates? I asked, suddenly remembering that this conversation had started because of a business meeting that had gone completely sideways. Harrison's smile carried a hint of mischief that made him look 10 years younger. Well, that depends largely on what we discover about their employee satisfaction and company culture during our expanded evaluation process. Some management practices we observed this morning were quite concerning from a corporate partnership perspective. As our lunch continued with discussions about my father's original vision for ethical business practices and responsible wealth management, I began to understand that this wasn't really about money or job opportunities. It was about choosing between hiding from who I was born to be and embracing the responsibility to use whatever advantages I had been given to help other people facing the same kinds of challenges that had shaped my character over the past 3 years. The ring on my finger caught the afternoon light streaming through the restaurant windows, and for the first time since putting it on, I understood exactly what it was meant to represent. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of electric tension that preceded major thunderstorms, though the sky above Chicago remained deceptively clear. I returned to Sterling and Associates, wearing the same professional outfits I had worn for 3 years, but everything felt different now that I knew Robert Harrison would be watching our workplace dynamics with the calculating eye of someone who controlled $50 million in potential investment. Stephanie had arrived an hour early, orchestrating preparations for the resumed merger meeting with military precision. Fresh flowers replaced yesterday's arrangements New catering appeared from a more expensive service, and she had apparently spent considerable time coaching the administrative staff on appropriate behavior around visiting executives. Remember, we want to project competence and professionalism at all times, she announced during a brief staff gathering before Harrison's arrival. This merger could transform everyone's career trajectory, assuming we make the right impression. Her eyes lingered on me during this speech, and I could see the wheels turning behind her perfectly applied makeup. Yesterday's revelation about my connection to Robert Harrison had clearly shaken her confidence, but she seemed determined to regain control of the narrative through sheer force of preparation and personality. Richard Windsor had also spent considerable effort preparing for today's meeting. He wore his most expensive suit and had apparently researched Harrison Technologies, extensively filling legal pads with notes about market positioning, competitive advantages, and strategic opportunities that he planned to discuss. The merger represented the culmination of his 15-year career building Sterling and Associates into a regional powerhouse. Robert Harrison arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, stepping out of the same black Mercedes with the calm confidence of someone who owned half of downtown Chicago. But this time, his attention immediately focused on the staff interactions and workplace atmosphere rather than the formal presentation materials arranged around the conference table. "Good morning, everyone," he said, shaking hands with each person individually and asking follow-up questions about their roles and responsibilities. When he reached Jennifer, he spent several minutes discussing her account management strategies and client satisfaction metrics. When he spoke with Derek from the creative team, he inquired about workflow processes and collaboration between departments. Stephanie watched these interactions with growing unease, as Harrison demonstrated genuine interest in employee perspectives that she had never bothered to solicit. Her prepared presentation assumed that merger discussions would focus on financial projections and market analysis, not workplace culture and staff satisfaction. "Shall we begin with the quarterly performance review?" Richard suggested, gesturing toward the conference table where charts and graphs were arranged in impressive displays. "Actually," Harrison said, settling into his chair with casual authority, "I'd like to start with some background about Sterling and Associates' approach to employee development and retention. Strong company culture is often the determining factor in successful mergers." This was clearly not the direction Stephanie had anticipated. She fumbled through her notes, searching for talking points about human resources, policies, and professional development programs that didn't really exist in any meaningful way at Sterling and Associates. "We believe in promoting from within whenever possible," Richard offered, though everyone in the room knew that Stephanie's recent promotion had nothing to do with merit-based advancement. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I've been looking at your staffing records and I noticed some unusual patterns in employee turnover. Several promising junior staff members left within the past 6 months, often after relatively short tenures. Do you have insights about retention challenges?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Everyone knew exactly why people had been leaving, but addressing it directly would require acknowledging management practices that reflected poorly on the Windsor family leadership style. "Sometimes people realize that our professional standards don't align with their personal career goals," Stephanie said carefully, shooting a meaningful glance in my direction. "We maintain high expectations for performance and presentation." Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that suggested he was paying very close attention to subtext and implications. "High standards are certainly important. I'm curious about how those standards are communicated and enforced." "Well," Stephanie continued with growing confidence, "we believe in direct feedback and clear accountability. If someone's work quality or professional presentation doesn't meet our clients' expectations, we address those issues promptly." I felt Jennifer tense beside me as Stephanie's words hit uncomfortably close to recent experiences. Derek shifted in his seat, and I could see other colleagues exchanging meaningful glances around the table. "Professional presentation," Harrison repeated slowly as if testing how the phrase sounded. "Could you give me an example of how those standards might apply in practical situations?" This was the moment Stephanie had been unconsciously building toward for 3 weeks. Her natural instinct to assert superiority over people she perceived as beneath her status overcame whatever political caution she might have exercised in front of a potential business partner. Just last month, she said with the confidence of someone sharing a perfect example, we had an employee wearing completely inappropriate jewelry during an important client meeting. Cheap, unprofessional accessories that could have reflected poorly on our company image. I addressed it directly because our clients expect a certain level of sophistication. The conference room fell silent as everyone realized what Stephanie had just revealed. Harrison's eyes moved slowly from her face to my left hand, where my father's ring caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Inappropriate jewelry, he said quietly, such as a family heirloom that belonged to one of the most respected businessmen in Chicago history. Stephanie's face went through several color changes as the implications of Harrison's question sank in. Richard Windsor looked like someone had just told him that his favorite restaurant was a front for organized crime. I think there may have been some misunderstanding, Richard said desperately, but Harrison raised his hand to stop him. No misunderstanding, Harrison replied with crystalline clarity. I'm beginning to understand your company culture quite clearly. The question is whether Sterling and Associates represents the kind of ethical business practices that Harrison Technologies wants to associate with our brand. He stood up from his chair with deliberate slowness, his movement commanding everyone's attention, as effectively as if he had shouted for silence. I've known the Ashworth family for over 20 years. He continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms much larger than this one. Thomas Ashworth was a man who measured success by character rather than appearance, who built lasting business relationships based on integrity rather than status symbols. His gaze moved around the room, taking in each face before settling on Stephanie with uncomfortable intensity. His daughter has clearly inherited those values despite working in an environment that apparently doesn't appreciate them, which raises serious questions about whether this merger aligns with Harrison Technologies' commitment to ethical business practices. The transformation in the power dynamics was so complete that I felt dizzy watching it happen. 3 weeks ago, Stephanie had humiliated me in front of these same people, confident that family privilege protected her from any consequences. Now she sat frozen as a billionaire, systematically dismantled her authority, using the same jewelry she had mocked as evidence of my unworthiness. I think we should take a break, Harrison announced. I'd like to conduct some additional research into employee satisfaction and management practices before continuing these discussions. As people filed out of the conference room, Harrison approached me with something that looked like paternal pride. I meant what I said yesterday about the position at Harrison Technologies. The offer stands whenever you're ready to accept it. But first, I realized there was some unfinished business to address right here at Sterling and Associates. The ring on my finger represented more than just my father's memory. It represented the responsibility to stand up for people who couldn't protect themselves against abuse of power. The merger meeting would resume in 2 hours, but the real negotiations were just beginning. The afternoon merger meeting convened at 2 o'clock sharp, but the atmosphere in the conference room felt like the tense moments before a verdict in a criminal trial. Robert Harrison had spent his lunch break conducting what he diplomatically called expanded due diligence, which everyone understood meant private conversations with Sterling and Associates employees about their actual experiences working for the Windsor family. Richard Windsor had clearly used the same time period for crisis management because he entered the conference room wearing the expression of someone who had received very bad news from multiple sources. Stephanie sat beside him, looking pale and defensive, her usual confident demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. Harrison took his seat with calm authority, flanked by 2 attorneys who had apparently materialized from Harrison Technologies' legal department during the break. Their presence transformed what had been merger discussions into something that felt much more like a corporate intervention. After reviewing additional information about Sterling and Associates' management practices, Harrison began without preamble. Harrison Technologies has decided to modify our partnership proposal. Richard Windsor leaned forward eagerly, apparently hoping that modify meant increased financial terms or expanded collaboration opportunities. Instead of a merger, Harrison continued, we're prepared to offer a complete acquisition. Harrison Technologies will purchase Sterling and Associates outright effective immediately subject to certain personnel and policy changes. The distinction between merger and acquisition was significant enough to make Richard's face go completely white. Mergers implied equal partnership and shared control. Acquisitions meant that Harrison Technologies would own everything and make all future decisions about company direction. The acquisition will include immediate implementation of new workplace harassment policies, Harrison said, consulting notes that his attorneys had obviously prepared during lunch. We'll also be conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel decisions made over the past 12 months, with particular attention to employee retention patterns and management accountability. Stephanie finally found her voice. I don't understand why you're focusing so much on internal personnel issues. This should be about market opportunities and revenue growth. Harrison turned toward her with the patient expression of someone explaining basic concepts to a confused Jade. Workplace culture directly impacts productivity, innovation, and long-term profitability. Companies that tolerate harassment and abuse inevitably underperform compared to organizations that prioritize respect and merit-based advancement. He gestured toward a folder that one of his attorneys placed on the conference table. Our research this afternoon identified multiple instances of systematic harassment targeting employees based on their perceived economic status. This behavior creates legal liability, destroys morale, and drives away talented people who could contribute to company success. The folder contained documentation that made my stomach clench with recognition. Apparently, Jennifer hadn't been the only person willing to share specific examples of Stephanie's behavior with Harrison's investigators. Derek had provided detailed accounts of the weekend work assignments that had forced his resignation. Angela had described the public humiliation about her shoes that had made her cry in front of the entire creative team. These management practices are completely unacceptable under Harrison Technologies' corporate policies, Harrison continued, which is why the acquisition will include immediate personnel changes designed to create a healthier work environment. Richard Windsor's desperation was becoming visible as he realized that his daughter's behavior was threatening not just the merger but his own career prospects. I assure you that any personnel issues can be addressed through additional training and oversight. Training isn't sufficient, Harrison replied firmly. The pattern of behavior documented here represents fundamental character deficiencies that can't be corrected through workshops or supervision. He opened the folder and withdrew several pages of typed statements, each bearing an employee's signature that testified to specific instances of harassment and abuse of authority. Effective immediately, Stephanie Windsor will be terminated from her position at Sterling and Associates. Her employment record will reflect termination for cause due to documented harassment of multiple colleagues. Stephanie shot to her feet so quickly that her chair toppled backward. You can't do this. My father owns this company. I have rights. Your father will retain a minority ownership stake and a consulting position, Harrison said calmly. But operational control transfers to Harrison Technologies, which means employment decisions are now made according to our standards rather than family relationships. The devastation on Stephanie's face was almost painful to watch, despite everything she had done to me and other employees over the past months. For 26 years, she had lived in a world where family privilege protected her from the consequences of treating other people badly. That world was ending in front of everyone who had suffered under her authority. This is completely unfair, she continued, her voice rising toward hysteria. I haven't done anything that violated company policies. Harrison's response was delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades handling difficult personnel situations. Sterling and Associates never developed adequate policies prohibiting workplace harassment, which was itself a management failure. Harrison Technologies maintains comprehensive standards that your documented behavior clearly violates. He turned toward me with an expression that combined professional respect and personal warmth. Margaret, I'd like to offer you the position of Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, effective immediately. Your first responsibility will be implementing new workplace culture initiatives designed to prevent the kind of systematic harassment that has been occurring here. The promotion was so dramatic that several people audibly gasped. In the span of 4 hours, I had gone from serving coffee at merger meetings to being offered a senior executive position by one of the most successful technology entrepreneurs in America. But more importantly, Harrison was giving me the opportunity to protect other employees from experiencing what I had endured over the past 3 weeks. The position would allow me to create policies and procedures that prioritized merit over family connections, that valued character over social status, that ensured workplace respect for everyone, regardless of their economic background. I accept, I said, meeting Harrison's eyes with gratitude and determination. As Harrison's attorneys began distributing acquisition paperwork and transition timelines, I watched Stephanie's escort from the building by security personnel who treated her with professional courtesy despite her increasingly desperate protests. Richard Windsor signed documents with the shell-shocked expression of someone who had just watched his carefully constructed empire change hands because he couldn't control his daughter's cruelty. The other employees who remained gathered around to congratulate me on the promotion, but also to express relief that the workplace harassment would finally end. Jennifer looked especially happy knowing that her job was now secure and that future advancement would depend on performance rather than family politics. That evening, as I sat in my modest apartment looking out at the Chicago skyline, I realized that my 3-year experiment in ordinary life had taught me exactly what my father had hoped I would learn. Real success came from treating people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, from using whatever power you possess to lift others up, rather than tear them down from measuring your worth by the impact you made on other people's lives. The ring on my finger caught the reflection from my laptop screen as I began drafting the new workplace policies that would govern Sterling and Associates under Harrison Technologies' ownership. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice had been served and that good people would no longer suffer in silence. 6 months later, I stood in the transformed conference room where everything had changed on that incredible Thursday afternoon, watching Jennifer lead her first major client presentation as the newly promoted account manager for strategic partnerships. The room buzzed with the productive energy of a workplace where people felt valued and respected, where promotions were earned through merit rather than family connections, where collaboration replaced competition as the driving force behind success. Sterling and Associates had been completely rebranded as Sterling Harrison Marketing Solutions, reflecting the merger of traditional advertising expertise with cutting-edge technology resources. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 40%. Client retention had improved dramatically, and we had attracted several major accounts, specifically because of our reputation for ethical business practices and innovative campaign strategies. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Implementing new policies and rebuilding workplace culture required patience, consistency, and sometimes difficult conversations with employees who had become accustomed to dysfunctional management styles. But every positive change reinforced my father's belief that businesses succeeded long-term only when they prioritized character over convenience. Robert Harrison had become more than a business partner. He served as mentor and surrogate father figure, sharing stories about my dad that helped me understand the man behind the corporate legend. Their friendship had been built on shared values about responsibility, integrity, and the obligation that came with financial success to help others achieve their potential. The inheritance money had allowed me to establish the Ashworth Foundation for Professional Development, providing scholarships and mentorship programs for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who showed promise but lacked connections or resources to advance their careers. Jennifer had become one of our first success stories, using foundation support to complete her MBA while continuing her full-time work and family responsibilities. Derek had returned to Sterling Harrison as creative director, leading a team that produced award-winning campaigns while maintaining the kind of collaborative atmosphere that brought out everyone's best work. Angela thrived as senior graphic designer, her confidence restored through working in an environment where talent was recognized rather than undermined. Even Richard Windsor had adapted to the new corporate culture, accepting his reduced role with surprising grace once he realized that his daughter's termination had actually saved both their careers. He worked diligently as senior consultant, contributing valuable industry knowledge while respecting the authority structure that prioritized professional competence over family relationships. Stephanie had struggled more with the transition to life without inherited privilege. After several unsuccessful attempts to leverage her father's reputation at other agencies, she eventually accepted a junior position at a small marketing firm where she was slowly learning that success required hard work rather than family connections. The experience was teaching her lessons about respect and humility that probably should have been learned decades earlier. This afternoon marked the Foundation's first scholarship ceremony, where we would be presenting awards to 12 outstanding recipients who embodied the values my father had tried to instill in me. The scholarship winners came from communities across Chicago, single mothers returning to school, first-generation college students pursuing business degrees, young people who had overcome significant obstacles to demonstrate academic excellence and community leadership. As I reviewed my prepared remarks for the ceremony, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that humiliating staff meeting to this moment of celebration and hope. The ring on my finger had become a symbol not just of family legacy, but of the responsibility that comes with privilege and the importance of using whatever advantages you possess to create opportunities for others. Robert Harrison arrived early for the ceremony, as had become his habit for Foundation events. He took genuine pride in seeing how the organization honored my father's memory while addressing real needs in our community. "Tom would be incredibly proud of what you've built here," he said as we watched scholarship recipients arriving with their families for the afternoon celebration. "This is exactly what he hoped you would do with your inheritance. Not just live comfortably, but make a meaningful difference in other people's lives." The ceremony itself was more moving than I had anticipated. Each scholarship recipient shared their story of overcoming challenges, pursuing education despite financial limitations, and maintaining hope for a better future through hard work and determination. Their experiences reminded me why this work mattered, why my father's values remained relevant in a world that often seemed to reward shortcuts over integrity. During my keynote address, I spoke about the lessons learned from temporarily leaving behind family wealth to discover who I really was when everything else was stripped away. The experience had taught me that real self-worth came from character rather than inheritance, from what you contributed to other people's lives rather than what you accumulated for yourself. Success isn't about the car you drive, the neighborhood where you live, or the jewelry you wear, I told the audience of scholarship recipients, their families, and Foundation supporters. True success is measured by whether you use whatever opportunities you've been given to help others achieve their potential. It's about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, about standing up for people who can't protect themselves, about building others up rather than tearing them down. As the ceremony concluded with families celebrating their children's achievements and scholarship recipients networking with Foundation mentors, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that good work was being done in my father's memory. Jennifer approached as I was gathering my notes from the podium, her face glowing with the confidence of someone who had successfully transformed her career through hard work and opportunity. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, gesturing toward the celebration continuing around us. "Not just for the scholarship money, but for creating a workplace where people like me can actually succeed based on merit." Her gratitude reminded me that individual actions could have ripple effects far beyond what we immediately see. Standing up to Stephanie's harassment had protected not just me, but everyone who would work at Sterling Harrison in the future. Using my inheritance to support education was helping families break cycles of poverty that might otherwise continue for generations. That evening, as I sat in my new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, still modest by my family's historical standards, but comfortable enough to reflect my changed circumstances, I thought about the letter my father had left with his attorney to be opened when I claimed the inheritance. The letter had been brief but deeply meaningful. "Margaret, if you're reading this, you've learned what I hoped you would discover about the difference between earned success and inherited privilege. Use the resources I'm leaving you to continue building the kind of world where everyone has the opportunity to prove their worth through character rather than circumstances. Make me proud not by accumulating wealth, but by sharing it wisely with others who need the same chances you've been given. The ring on my finger caught the moonlight reflecting off the lake as I began drafting plans for next year's foundation expansion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to make a positive difference in other people's lives. But tonight, I felt the peace that comes from knowing you're living according to the values that really matter. Before closing my laptop, I wanted to ask you something that I've been thinking about throughout this entire journey. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone tried to make you feel small because of your appearance, your background, or your circumstances? How did you handle it? And what did that experience teach you about the difference between real confidence and the kind of arrogance that comes from inherited privilege? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others discover it. Subscribe to see more stories about standing up for what's right, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I hope it inspires you to remember that true strength comes from lifting others up, not putting them down.